And I think so in this market, today we were looking up to SP's here by C. First second look at me back. I just something I started new. It was about the free up, which is starting with the market, but the bubble when you break them up. I do not want to be the boys. Because these are kids. And it's a delight with the life and with the death.
The young girl stood silently in a room full of corpses, staring off into the distance. She was in a trance, seemingly unaware of the carnage that had just unfolded around her. Some of the men were shot or stabbed or beaten. Others had no apparent cause of death whatsoever. But the young girl was unscathed. She was wearing a yellow summer dress and looked like she couldn't have been more than 3 years old. She awoke from her trance, still paying no heed to the violence in the room, and left. This is the story of SCP-053, the young girl. Her strange and terrifying life before containment, her thrilling capture, and the part she played in one of the most dangerous SCP Foundation cross tests of all time. She had no name. The young girl could never spend enough time around someone to be given one. It was her terrible curse that she could never stay in one place for too long, or something truly awful would happen to everyone around her. She'd been drifting for years, but never grew to look older than a child. Her memories were long but formless, divided mostly into 10-minute increments. The young girl kept on moving. It was all she could do. In 1993, when the young girl had already been alive for a very long time, she found herself in Illinois after days of trekking on the roadside. She would scavenge what little food she needed from the trash and drink from lakes, rivers, or even puddles when she needed to. Deep down, the young girl knew that if she ever grew hungry or thirsty, she would not die. In her travels, the young girl had managed to scrounge together a few dollars, and though she knew her contact with people had to be limited, there was one thing she wanted that felt worth the risk: a candy bar. It had been a long time since she tasted chocolate, and she found the idea of tasting it again too enticing to resist. When she reached Chicago, she entered a small corner store with her handful of dollars, selected a candy bar from the rack, and approached the counter. For reasons even she didn't fully understand, she kept her eyes down as she placed the money on the counter. You see, SCP-053 was always a special child. As we briefly mentioned earlier, you might even say she was cursed. Whenever she was around other people for too long, terrible things tended to happen. Unspeakable things. And as a component of this strange, unexplainable curse, or perhaps as a means of keeping her safe from it, the young girl was doomed to never understand the nature of her predicament. It was like there was a mental wall between her and the horrors her presence could cause. All she knew was that it was best to avoid eye contact, stay away from large groups of people at all costs, and never spend any longer than 10 minutes around anyone, ever. That's why as she waited for her chocolate bar at the cash register, she kept her head down and waited to go. The cashier looked upon this strange girl with apparent concern. It had been a slow day, all in all. A few listless patrons milled around the store, window shopping. His brain was practically on autopilot until he saw this child. She looked filthy, in a disheveled dress, and was totally alone. What on earth had happened to this child? The more he looked at her, the more he sensed a creepy vibe exuding from her. Something about this girl was wrong. He spoke softly to her, introducing himself as Miles, and asking her where her mommy and daddy were. The young girl hesitated for just a few seconds too long for his liking, before simply saying
that
they were at home. Any parent who'd let their 3-year-old kid just wander around the south side of Chicago alone was either crazy, neglectful, or both. He asked her politely to remain in the store while he gave the police a quick call. He'd even let her have the candy bar for free while she waited. Immediately, the little girl became uncomfortable. She had already been in here for a few minutes now, and while Miles called the police, he expected her to wait around even longer. Again, she couldn't even tell you why she knew waiting around like this would be so dangerous, but nervous that she needed to get out. Around the store, the few patrons still inside started to get a strange feeling, like someone was watching them. Soon what seemed like mild paranoia was quickly becoming white-hot anger. Pure rage. They felt almost like they had to kill someone, but not just anyone. Someone particular. They had to kill the little girl. It wasn't long until the police arrived. Two officers, Holiday and DeWitt, entered to collect the apparently neglected little girl. It was a story they'd sadly heard all too often, a tragically common occurrence in the big city. When the two of them approached the young girl, she was looking down at the ground. They tried to speak to her, but she was unresponsive. Miles looked on, concerned, but deep down, he felt the same bizarre progression all the other storegoers were feeling. Confusion, irritability, and finally, violent rage. The corner store was a powder keg. All it needed now was a spark. And that spark came when Officer Holiday reached down and took the young girl by the arm. His bare skin touched hers, and it was all over. The cop twitched. His mind washed out in murderous insanity as he reached for his sidearm. Officer DeWitt opened his mouth to protest, but he didn't manage to get a syllable out before Holiday turned and shot him. In a fraction of a second, the quiet corner store exploded into a violent bloodbath as the patrons and cops slaughtered each other. All the while, the young girl just stood there in a trance. Everyone was dead within minutes, except Miles and the young girl. He shakily rose to his feet, his mind carved out by madness, and reached for Officer Holiday's discarded pistol. Outside of the store, the young girl appeared, walking out as if nothing had happened. Inside, Miles's body was sprawled over the counter, clutching his chest as if his heart had just exploded. This was the true nature of the young girl's curse. Anyone who meets her eye, touches her skin, or spends over 10 minutes around her is destined to slip into a state of murderous insanity. They'll go into a kill-crazy frenzy and attack anyone around them until all that is left is them and the young girl. At which point they'll try to kill her too, but the mere act of attempting to kill her is also fatal, killing its victims with a massive heart attack or a seizure. The second part of the girl's curse is that she herself can never die. She keeps coming back, unknowingly causing more misery and death along the way. Until, of course, a certain secret organization took notice. That night, the young girl sat in the cavernous interior of a local abandoned warehouse, quietly eating her hard-earned candy bar. Suddenly, she heard a quiet crack in the distance. She tried to move her left arm, but found it was numb. She could barely move it. The girl turned her head and saw a tranquilizer dart sticking out of her skin. Instinctively, she got up and began to run, limping as her left leg started to lose all feeling too. Suddenly, she was surrounded by footsteps, as masked men in SWAT uniforms emerged out of the darkness on all sides. The last thing she remembered before slipping out of consciousness was a blindfold being pulled over her eyes, and tiny metal handcuffs clasping over her wrists. When she woke up, she was in the nicest room she had slept in years. It was 16 feet by 16 feet, with toys, books, and games. Standing across the room from her was a stranger in a full hazmat suit, connected to a long steel cable leading out of the room. He spoke calmly and politely. A timer on his wrist counted down from 10 minutes. The stranger explained to the young girl that they would be taking care of her now, and would provide her with all the toys and games and treats she wanted, provided she cooperated and submitted willingly to some tests. Compared to living out on the streets with food or comfort, this seemed like an excellent compromise. She would live in what seemed like luxury, and every so often, she'd be taken to a testing room with a stranger in an orange jumpsuit. After a few minutes of waiting, the stranger would inevitably go feral and attempt.
That ain't feel like